What's up guys, hope you're having a good day. In this video we're going to be taking a deep dive into each of the main card fights taking place this weekend at UFC Fight Night Cannonier versus Imavov. Hopefully you're going to find the information in this video useful, and if you do and you want to watch more breakdown videos for all the prelim fights on this card, head on over to my website mmabettingtips.com. You'll find a link for that in the description below. On my website, I share all my bets for UFC events, as well as include breakdown videos for every single matchup. Obviously, with how much depth we go into on these main card fights, don't get the time to put out videos for entire cards because I often am still researching fights up until Friday or even sometimes the day of the event. So if I had to wait to put these videos out, you know, they would come out very late because it takes me a while to research all the fights on the card. It's a very time-consuming process. Also, if you watch every UFC event live, you might want to check out my live betting service. We make a profit on around 70% of UFC events. Live betting the UFC is my speciality. I've been doing it a long time. As you can see, nice, steady, consistent uptrend on the profit chart over the last 8 years. And if you watch every UFC event live, joining my live betting service is going to give you a big edge if you plan on live betting the fights, because like I say, we make a profit most weeks. So check that out. I'll leave a link for that in the description below. My website's currently under redevelopment, which you'll see if you go on it, because lots of pages which are unfinished, broken, stock images, stuff like that. But in the past week, I did actually finish building my live betting page, which you can access just by coming to the UFC betting section of the site. And I've uploaded a video to the page of what my live betting service is actually like. You can see it here, you can watch it here, so give that a try, and it kind of shows you what we do in live betting. Unfortunately, I don't think I'm going to be able to upload this to YouTube yet because of, you know, copyright issues with playing the Buckley Ruziboev fight, you know, on that video, but hopefully in time. There's like a time period that has to pass before you can put, you know, footage of UFC fights on YouTube, and the Buckley Ruziboev fight I think is still a bit too recent to be able to put it on YouTube. So I'll probably post this on YouTube eventually, but you can now view it on my website, so go check it out. It's an interesting video. It shows you the kind of stuff we do. Alrighty then, so now let's get into breaking down the main event between Jared Cannonier and Nassourdine Imavov. So let's start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, and we can see that Imavov is the slight favourite at average odds of around 1.80, which is going to be minus 125 for an implied probability of 56%. And if we take a look at the odds on Cannonier, he's around an average of 2.0, which is going to be plus 100 for an implied probability of 50%. So Cannonier is 40 years old, 5'11", with a 77.5-inch reach. And Imavov is 28 years old, 6'3", with a 75-inch reach. So there's a couple of interesting X factors on this one. The first obviously being their age. So Imavov is 12 years younger than Cannonier, which statistically gives him around a 70% chance of winning. So the younger fighter will win around 70% of the time, 7-0, when there's a 12-year age gap in a fight. So that's obviously a massive trend in Imavov's favour. And if we look at the odds on Imavov, which are 1.80, they carry an implied probability of 56%. So if over the long term, you were to just blind bet the statistic of the younger guy winning whenever there's a 12-year age gap, you're going to win 70% of those bets. So perhaps the smartest thing to do with a fight like this is not try and fight that trend and just bet Imavov, because, you know, it's a lot easier to place bets on trends that you know are going to win 70% of the time than on fighters that you know are only going to win 30% of the time. You know, if we put a lot of weight on that trend, which we probably should, because hey, you know, it's kind of undeniable, right? Young hungry bulls beat, you know, these older guys very high percentage of the time. And so we'll talk a bit about that in a bit more detail in a moment, and what I mean, what I feel the age gap between these two means in the context of this matchup. But straight off the bat, that's a big advantage for Imavov. Now, what's interesting about the size of these two is that Cannonier is very small for a middleweight. At 5'11", he's going to be one of the shortest middleweights in the division, but he actually has an abnormally long reach for someone that's 5'11", which enables him to get away with it. And as we can see, even though Imavov will be a good amount taller than Cannonier, Cannonier's actually got the reach advantage. So I don't think size is going to be too much of an issue in this fight. Again, because of how they both match up stylistically, which again I will get into very shortly. The only other X factor to consider is that Cannonier is coming back from an ACL injury. This is his first fight back from an ACL injury, which isn't ideal at this stage in his career. However, ACL treatments, ACL surgeries are pretty effective these days, to the extent that a lot of the time athletes talk about how their knee that they've suffered an ACL injury on feels stronger than it did before after the surgery. So ACL injury is not as big of a deal for me as they used to be. They used to potentially be a career ender in a lot of sports, but they're not as significant a problem as they used to be. Having said that, isn't ideal having an injury like that, which is a pretty significant, nasty injury at 40 years old. Cannonier is a tough guy. We don't know if it'll affect him. We'll find out on Saturday night. Goes without saying that one of the reasons why young guys have such a big advantage over guys in their late 30s, early 40s, is because when you get to the stage of your career that Cannonier is at, you do start to decline rapidly from fight to fight. Having said that, we haven't seen much of that in Gerard Cannonier. If anything, his last fight against Vettori was the best performance of his career. And so Cannonier is one of these guys who isn't really showing any signs of decline. So if you do bet against Cannonier this weekend, based on that age statistic that favours Imavov, you are being perhaps a little presumptuous. Because at the end of the day, statistics, trends, they're only useful when interpreted correctly. And a trend like that is a very good guide for us. But, making blind betting decisions based on trends and stats, I don't know, man. I don't know. I stay open mind on it. I'll keep an open mind on that. But with a guy like Cannonier, who isn't showing any signs of decline, I wouldn't write him off too much this weekend, is all that I would say. And of course, a few weeks ago, we bet on a fighter who was a similar age to Jared Cannonier when we bet on Angela Hill to beat Luana Pinheiro, and she came through for us in a big way. So sometimes it makes sense to bet on these older fighters if you feel you can get a lot of value on them when they've got a favourable matchup. We also bet on Carlos Diego Ferreira to beat Mateusz Rebecki. As a big underdog. And we'll talk. So I'm not opposed to betting these older fighters, but I need to do them under certain circumstances. And we're going to talk in this breakdown video about how I feel the circumstances surrounding this fight are in potentially betting Cannonier. So, where should we even begin with this one? Alright, so I want to start this breakdown video off by saying that if both guys show up and perform to their full potential, if both of them show up and fight like they usually do, I think this is a very, very bad stylistic matchup for Imavov. I think Cannonier causes him big problems. So that makes this a very interesting fight for betting, because both guys are in the even money odds range. The implied probability on both of them is close to 50%. I mean, it is bang on 50% with Cannonier, right? And so if we favour Cannonier in this matchup, which I definitely do, there's a lot for us to think about, because he could potentially be a really good bet here. But now I want to talk a little bit about my philosophy to betting on sports. So we obviously make a profit on everything we do that is betting related. Football, pre-fight betting, UFC betting, doesn't matter what it is. Long term, we're profitable. And that's an extremely difficult thing to do. There are very few people on earth that are profitable betting on sports, if we talk in percentage terms, right? In terms of the number of people on earth or the number of people that bet on sports compared to the number that are profitable. We know 95% of people that open betting accounts never make a profit. Now, if you go on Twitter or Instagram or even my comment section, there's tons of people that talk like they make money betting on sports, but very few do. I think those of us that do make a profit betting on sports do so by sticking to very tight, rigid principles that we know pretty much guarantee we're going to make a profit long term, and we don't allow our monkey brains to throw us off course and ignore those principles. And it's impossible to always ignore those principles because we're only human, we will make mistakes. But deep down we know if we stick to these principles we've learned over many years, these principles will guide us to profitability. So that presents me with a challenging dilemma for betting this fight. Because one of my principles for betting on sports is I completely accept that making money betting on sports is exceptionally difficult. I have to work crazy hours. I barely leave my house. Like, it's fucking hard. I'm permanently chained to my desk, permanently chained to my computer. That's what it takes to be profitable betting on sports. It's fucking hard. Very difficult, very stressful. It's not an easy path to walk. But one of the principles that enables me to make a profit betting on everything that I do over the long term is I only want to be placing bets in a favourable betting environment, because luck plays such a huge part in sports. Sports are so unpredictable, they're so chaotic. You know, the reason we love sports is because anything can happen. We love the surprises, we love the drama, we love the chaos. So I know, because of all the chaos, it's a very difficult thing to make money betting on sports. So you can control the environment in which you place bets. You can find ways to stack the odds in your favour to a level where bad luck and chaos, they can't hurt you as much as if you're putting money in a lot of marginal, more risky positions. And so you're never going to be able to avoid periods of very bad luck. We've just come through a period of extreme bad luck on football. We might still be in it. It's too early to tell. And we had a period of a lot of bad luck live betting UFC towards the end of last year, which I'm pretty sure we're out of now, as we made a profit on 9 of the last 12 events. So we know bad luck will impact us, but we can control the environment in which we bet so that the impact of bad luck, randomness, and chaos in sports is reduced as much as we can reduce it, right? So why am I even talking about that? Why is that important in the context of this fight? It's important because when I'm betting on sports, I want to be betting when trends are in my favour, when I'm betting in a favourable betting environment. The way I would describe it is, you know, there are two directions that you can push a boulder, right? You could push a boulder up a mountain, you could push a boulder down a mountain, but it's a lot easier to push a boulder down a mountain than it is to push a boulder up a mountain, you know? So you want to be looking at situations where, you know, you've got lots of trends on your side. If you think about the boulder example, right? You know, if you try and push a boulder down a mountain, you might fail. Maybe it gets stuck on a rock, or, you know what I mean? Maybe it falls off the edge, or fucking maybe it blows up or something. You know, maybe fucking, you know, I don't know. Maybe Thanos turns up, touches a boulder, and it disappears. Who the fuck knows? But you know, the probability of you pushing that boulder from the top of the mountain to the bottom is a lot higher than you pushing the boulder from the bottom of the mountain to the top of the mountain, because so much more can go wrong to fuck you over when you're trying to push a boulder up a mountain, right? So if you think of that in the context of betting on sports, When you push a boulder down a mountain, you've got gravity on your side. You know what I mean? You've got the fucking angle of the fucking mountain on your side. You've got a lot of shit on your side. So that even if you completely miscalculate the route that you've got to push this boulder down a mountain, chances are, even, you know, if you're a fucking complete idiot that didn't plan anything, you could just push it and it'll still hit the bottom and you'll win, right? Even if you got the situation completely wrong. And I kind of look at sports betting like that. If we use the trend that we spoke about earlier on in the video as kind of an example, we know for a fact, an indisputable fact, that the younger fighter wins around 70% of the time when there's a 12-year age gap in a fight. So we know long term, 70% of the bets that we place on guys like Jared Cannonier, irrespective of everything else, irrespective of how they match up stylistically, 70% of the time we're going to lose. So we've got a few choices here, right? Because I do think Cannonier will win. I do think he's more likely to win. But is our ego so big that we think that we can cherry pick the 30% of the time the guys win, the older guys win when there's a 12-year age gap in a fight? Is our ego that big that we think we can be profitable long term, trying to cherry pick that 30% of the time where these older guys beat these younger guys in fights like this? Or is it much smarter for us to just go, you know what, this is a bad matchup for Imavov, but I'm going to look for situations where I've got a 70% trend in my favour, and I'm not going to think I'm smart enough to be able to make a profit long term betting fights where I know 70% of the time I'm going to lose. And that's really my philosophy with sports betting. Sometimes it's about getting out of your own way and acknowledging that, you know, when we've got 12 to 15 UFC fights to bet most weeks, and we've got hundreds of football matches to bet every week, I can choose when to put my money at risk, when to place bets. And betting Cannonier this weekend would be trying to fight against a real strong trend. And so that is making this fight interesting, because I'm very tempted to bet Cannonier, but I've also got to check myself and remind myself of the reasons why I have these principles in the first place, right? I'll just show you, again, my website's under construction, so apologies for the results page currently being a total broken mess. But this is our results chart for UFC betting. As you can see, we've been doing amazing over the last 2 years. You know, dating back to July 2022, we've just been non-stop consistent profits. We've been doing great. Then you have this like scrappy period of break even, and before that we've been doing great, right? When I stick to my principles, this happens, where we make pretty much non-stop consistent profits for 2 years. When I deviate from my principles, this happens, and we can get these scrappy periods where we float around break even. So in situations like this, I know that if I start betting guys like Cannonier, I'm going to get myself in trouble. If I stick to my principles, my profit chart is just going to keep grinding up and everything's going to be gravy and we're going to make good money. You know? Now, earlier on when we spoke about some bets that we'd placed recently, we spoke about the fact that we have kind of broken this principle recently when we bet on Angela Hill to beat Luana Pinheiro, and when we bet on Carlos Diego Ferreira to beat Mateusz Rebecki. But obviously, if you've watched the breakdown videos for those fights, you'll know there are reasons why we broke the principles in both fights. Fundamentally, in fact, I'm not going to go over the reasons why we broke the principles in both those fights, because it'll just make the video very long, and almost everyone watching this video will have watched the breakdown videos for Ferreira and Hill. If you haven't, go back and watch them. But there are certain situations where I don't mind breaking the principles if I'm getting a very good risk to reward ratio for my money, and if a fighter has shown me clear signs, or if there are things I've seen which gives me a really high degree of confidence that the older fighter is going to show up and perform how I expect them to, which was the case with Angela Hill, then I'm happy to pull the trigger. But 40 years old for Cannonier after an ACL injury, it's tricky for me. And so we're absolutely crushing it on pre-fight money line bets at the moment. Pre-fight bets, we're doing so good on pre-fight bets, right? We've won 8 in a row. I know technically the table shows 9, but for some reason my database has stacked the Sarukian bet on top of the Jamal Hill bet. I don't know why it does that. It might be alphabetical or something. I don't know why it does it. But yeah, we've won 8 in a row because obviously Jamal Hill lost after Sarukian. So we've won 8 bets in a row. I would really, 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 really like to make it 10 winning bets in a row, just as like a personal achievement. It's been a long time since I've won 10 pre-fight bets in a row. So I would really, really, really like to win 10 bets in a row. I would love to win 10 bets in a row. So I'm going to shoot for 10 in a row. And I know betting guys like Jared Cannonier is just inducing danger. And I know we can find stronger positions for us to put our money than that. Because we'll be gambling if we try and fight against that trend. So I know I've spent a lot of time talking about that trend, and we haven't even got into how they match up from a stylistic point of view and why I like Cannonier so much in this fight. But I kind of needed to explain that, because what I can't do is go, oh, I think Cannonier is a great... I think Cannonier is a real bad stylistic matchup at Imavov here. And then at the end of the breakdown, I'm like, but I'm not betting him. It wouldn't make any sense, right? I've got to give you the context behind why I'm not betting him, even though I think Cannonier will cause Imavov big problems. So in terms of how they match up from a stylistic point of view, obviously they're both primarily strikers, so we can talk a little bit about how they match up in terms of grappling. Both guys are kind of similar when it comes to grappling from a defensive point of view. Both guys are pretty easy to take down. They're both quite weak off their back. Cannonier is a little better at working his way back up to his feet, to be fair. But both guys pretty easy to take down and not that difficult to hold down. In terms of offensive wrestling, Cannonier, for the most part throughout his entire UFC career, has just been a pure striker, whereas Imavov's been a little bit more well-rounded and mixes it up a little bit more. Having said that, we have seen Cannonier implement some grappling in the recent fights. He used a bit of grappling against Marvin Vettori, which I was quite surprised to see. And so I wouldn't rule out him trying to take Imavov down in this fight, but it's not usually something we see from Cannonier. If there is to be any grappling in this match, I think it's more likely to come from Imavov, particularly when he gets tired. I think, good chance he'll try and take Cannonier down. But his offensive wrestling's not great, and it's not easy. It's not that easy to hold Cannonier down unless you're, a pretty skilled grappler, which Imavov isn't. I would give Imavov the advantage on the ground, but he ain't gonna find it easy to get Cannonier down and hold him there, so it probably won't even matter. But in terms of grappling, do give the slight edge to Imavov. In terms of striking, how these two match up when it comes to striking very much depends on the game plan and strategy from Cannonier. This is Cannonier's fight to lose. So, the reason why this is Cannonier's fight to lose is because Imavov is one of these guys that doesn't fight effectively when put on the back foot. So he doesn't like being pressured. Imavov is great when you'll stand in the middle of the octagon with him, or when you'll allow him to dictate the pace of the fight. Because if you allow him to be the aggressor, if you allow him to dictate the pace, if you don't take the fight to him, he can just stand in kickboxing range, chip away at you, use his length, fight at a really nice, comfortable pace, and look very flashy and technical doing it, and it's all great, right? And to be fair, there are some of Cannonier's past fights where he has been a bit passive and hasn't thrown a particularly high volume, and he is quite happy to stand in the middle of the octagon and get into a nice friendly point fighting contest. He's done that in a lot of his fights. And I'm not necessarily going to say that favours Imavov, because I still think Cannonier could win a close decision in a fight like that. Because I do think he's more technical than Imavov. I do think he's got more impactfulness on his shots. But if we see Cannonier take a similar approach to this fight that he took against someone like Strickland, for example, then I could see it being pretty close. Especially when you've got judges out here scoring fights in favour of like Paulo Costa, who we saw last weekend, which is fucking crazy. So I do think this could be a close competitive fight if Cannonier is going to just try and win a kickboxing match in the middle of the octagon. Because then Imavov, standing in the middle of the octagon, can use his length to kind of chip away at Cannonier. Where this fight becomes really difficult for Imavov is if Cannonier uses the same game plan and strategy that he used in his last fight against Marvin Vettori, where he comes forward, puts a lot of pressure on his opponents, and forces them to fight on the back foot. So this worked extremely well against Vettori, and if he uses this same strategy against Imavov, which is quite likely he will, to be fair, because, well, you're only as good as your last fight, and your last fight probably gives us the best indicator of what to expect from you in your next one. So if Cannonier does, utilise this more pressure fighting style in future, I like it, but it's also going to be highly effective against Imavov. Because Imavov is one of these guys that is just not at all effective when fighting on the back foot. He can't fight going backwards. And so if you pressure him and put him on the back foot and force him to fight on the outside under pressure, his volume falls off a cliff, he tires out very quickly, and he's quite bad defensively. Imavov's only good defensively and only good at using his length in the middle of the octagon. Put him on the back foot, terrible. Imavov's also got quite a big issue if Cannonier does come into this fight with a pressure-heavy style of fighting, because Imavov doesn't really have much power in his hands. So he doesn't have the power to deter opponents from coming forward. And this is the issue that Marvin Vettori, and to some extent, Sean Strickland had. Because we know Vettori and Strickland, just like Imavov, neither of them really have any power in their hands. They're more volume strikers. And so if Cannonier wants to come into this fight with a pressure-heavy style and put Imavov on the back foot, we know Cannonier's got good footwork, good head movement, he's good defensively, his boxing's good, he's durable, decent chin, can take a shot. Imavov will probably land as Cannonier's coming forward. But it's all jabs, it's all range-finding strikes, there's not really much power in Imavov's hands. So he's going to find it difficult to back Cannonier up if Cannonier wants to come forward and pressure him in the same way that Vettori struggled, because Vettori didn't have the power to back Cannonier up either. So what does all this mean from a betting point of view? It means if you're going to bet this fight, bet Cannonier, because it's a pretty good stylistic matchup for him. Hasn't shown any signs of decline. On top of that, Cannonier is also one of these guys who started his career quite late. I don't think he started fighting until his mid-20s, and so he may have a longer career like someone like a Daniel Cormier. Because he started his career later, he might decline later as well. But he is 40 years old, which is really fucking old. And when you're that age, father time can creep up on you very quickly. So while Cannonier hasn't shown any signs of decline, and I'd actually argue the Vettori fight was the best performance of his career, at this stage in a fighter's career, one day they could show up and look a complete shadow of themselves. So it is risky betting on Cannonier. That's why I wouldn't do it. The age stat is a strong one to fight against. But gun to my head, if my life depended it and I had to bet on one of these guys, I would pick Cannonier. I think he's more likely to win. So, let me know what you think on Discord. Let me know what you think in the comments below. But I think this is a favourable matchup for Mr. Cannonier. In terms of the over-under on this one, very likely this fight goes deep. Both guys are tough. Both are durable. Both are reasonably skilled everywhere. I don't think either of them has a massive advantage anywhere, and they're both tough. They're not easy to get out of there. If we look at Cannonier's record, he's gone to a decision in 5 of his last 6. If we look at Imavov, gone to a decision in 3 of his last 4. So very likely this fight goes deep as well. The odds don't get me excited though. I would be interested in over 2.5 rounds, but the odds are absolutely terrible, so you can't bet that. In terms of props, the only one I would consider is Cannonier by decision. That's the most likely outcome for me. But the odds are absolutely shocking. In percentage terms, they're only like 30% better than Cannonier straight. So I would just bet Cannonier money line if you really want to bet this fight and not try and get cute and take a prop. So I hope you found that breakdown useful. Let's move on to the next one. Now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Dustin Jacoby against Dominic Reyes. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Jacoby is a pretty big favourite at average odds of around 1.42, which is going to be minus 238 for an implied probability of 70%. If we take a look at the odds on his opponent Reyes, he's around an average of 2.90, which is going to be plus 190 for an implied probability of 34%. Let me just zoom back in on this as well. There we go. So Jacoby is 36 years old, 6'3", with a 76-inch reach, and Reyes is 34 years old, 6'4", with a 77-inch reach. So both guys roughly the same age, roughly the same size, and it's possible that both these guys are on a bit of a decline. What I would say about this matchup is I think we can be pretty sure that Jacoby is on a very steep decline. Just because for me, he ticks a lot more boxes of being on a steep decline than Reyes does. So for me, I've kind of got absolute confirmation that Jacoby is on a steep decline. With Reyes, it's a little bit more ambiguous for the reasons I'll describe in a moment. But both these guys obviously definitely on the downward career trajectory. The reason why I feel we've got absolute confirmation that Jacoby is on a decline is, like I say, he's ticked a lot of boxes. He's 36 years old, which is pretty old. He's had a lot of fights, so he's had almost 30 pro MMA fights. On top of this, he's also got an extensive pro kickboxing career. And on top of that, we've also seen Jacoby get rocked, wobbled and dropped multiple times in his recent fights, which is not something we'd really seen earlier in his career. Jacoby was one of these guys who was very durable, had a great chin, could take a lot of damage, whereas recently he's been getting wobbled pretty easily, which is usually a sign that an older fighter is starting to lose their chin, lose their durability and start to decline a bit. So for me, Jacoby definitely on a decline, and so from here on out, you'd expect him to look worse and worse and worse every time we see him. With Dominic Reyes, I'm not so sure. So when it comes to sports, I've been betting on sports for 20 years, and for me, I think a lot of people who bet on sports and watch sports underestimate the amount of luck that is has a big impact on the outcome of sporting events, fights, games, results on paper. So Reyes is an interesting case study because he doesn't really fit the profile of someone who would be declining. However, results on paper suggest that he is declining because he's been knocked out in his last 3, which is obviously a trend and it's not a good thing. But let's explore this a little bit deeper. So Reyes isn't that old for a light heavyweight. We know that in the heavier weight classes, fighters start to decline older in their career. So while 34 years old would be quite old for a flyweight, he's only just turned 34 and is not that old for a light heavyweight. He's also only had 16 pro fights. This is around half the number of pro fights that Jacoby has had. And he hasn't got the extensive kickboxing background that Jacoby has, where Jacoby probably would have been in all these wars in kickboxing over the years. On top of that, even though Reyes has been knocked out in his last 3, he hasn't been one of these guys that will have taken tons of damage throughout his career. So if you look at a guy like Jacoby that's had almost 30 pro fights, and again, this isn't including kickboxing matchups, so where you see these kickboxing fights, they're not included on his record. This is literally just his MMA fights we're talking about. So he's had almost 30 MMA fights. And you can just see that he spent a lot of time in the cage competing against a decent level of opponent. He only really had 3 fights in MMA against a relatively low level of opponent before he was off to the races, and he's fighting, UFC level guys, Clifford Starks, Chris Camozzi, David Branch, Andrew Sanchez, Tim Williams. He was off to the races very, very quickly. And so, when you look at a guy like Jacoby, he has been in a lot of wars. He has taken a lot of damage. He's been knocked out a bunch of times from very early in his career. He's fought a decent level of opponent from very, very early on in his career. So it's no real surprise that at 36 years old, which again isn't crazy old for a light heavyweight, but Jacoby is declining. When you look at Dominic Reyes, it's a completely different story. So he hasn't really taken much damage. And hasn't really had many fights, considering he's been fighting for 10 years now. And so when I come across a fighter like this, I really have to ask myself, what role has luck, or in this instance bad luck, what role has bad luck played in Dominic Reyes' career? Because 4 fights ago, he beat one of the greatest fighters of all time. If we put MMA decisions up, because obviously on paper, this fight shows as a loss, but I'm pretty sure if we look at the media scores for the Dominic Reyes versus John Jones fight, I'm pretty sure the majority of the MMA media will have scored this fight for Reyes. I know I did. They did. So as you can see here, so 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So 14 of the 21 members of the MMA media scored this fight for Dominic Reyes when he fought John Jones. And I did as well. I thought Reyes won 3 rounds to clear. Very, very, very clear. But the judges didn't do their job that night. And they scored the fight for John unanimously, which I think is one of the worst decisions in a title fight ever. I think that fight was clear as day for Dominic Reyes. So I look at this and I go, Reyes has beaten these guys like Jared Cannonier, Volkan Oezdemir, Chris Weidman, back in a time when Weidman was a lot better than he is now 5 years ago. And he beat John Jones. He should have been the light heavyweight champ. And yet 4 fights after beating John Jones, because again, results are irrelevant, Reyes won this fight. 4 fights after beating John Jones, at the age of just 34 years old, without that many miles on the clock. He's a relatively big underdog against Jacoby. There seems like a bit of a divergence there. That doesn't make a whole lot of sense to me. I know that getting knocked out can change a fighter forever. I know that a fighter's chin can go, they can become less durable. But Reyes has only been knocked out 3 times. How many times has Jacoby been knocked out? We already said he's been rocked and wobbled multiple times in his last few fights. Menafield rocked him a couple times. Mirzakhanov rocked him. He's been knocked out. Let's take a look. I mean, that looks like it was probably, he took some damage in that one if it was ground and pound. So 1 there, knocked out by Ferreira, that's 2. 3 knockdowns there, so that would be 3. He's been knocked out, knocked down 3 times as well, but probably wobbled a bunch more and had a lot more head trauma. So in the case of Reyes, I am asking myself, how much of a factor does bad luck play in his career? Because you can get guys like Paul Craig who are absolutely terrible everywhere, but they get a bit lucky. They pull off these lucky wins out of nowhere, these Hail Mary submissions. They put a bit of winning streak together, but then eventually when their luck runs out, you get to see what a guy like Paul Craig's really capable of, and he kind of gets found out as an extremely low-level fighter. Is the opposite happening with Dominic Reyes, where, he's ran into 2 dangerous opponents and been knocked out against Prohaska and Blachowicz, no shame in that. And then even though I wouldn't classify Ryan Spann as a high-level fighter, he is a big guy. He's 6'4", I think, 6'5", 80-inch reach, big, true, legit one-shot knockout power. Did he just get caught against Spann? What the 3 consecutive knockout losses against 3 very dangerous guys really tell us? Does that mean Reyes is on a steep decline? Does it mean he's totally shot? Does it mean he's lost his chin? Or could they have just been bad luck? Could it have just been 3 fights against 3 very dangerous guys where he got caught, but the version of Reyes that fought John Jones and outclassed John Jones in a 25-minute fight, is that version of Reyes still there? He's just been knocked out and caught 3 times in a row. And so on paper, it looks like he's on a decline, but he isn't actually on a decline. Tricky, right? The example I would use to kind of drive home the point that I'm making is that people are very results orientated. They don't actually look at what is true. They don't look at the performances. They don't look at the role that luck could be playing in sports, and it plays a massive part in sports. Results very rarely tell you the whole story. And so, we've all played roulette, and we've had those occasions where we've seen the same colour, or the ball land on the same colour number 10, 15, 20 times in a row, right? Or just get black number after black number after black number after black number, right? Someone that doesn't really understand probability, someone that doesn't really understand what they're doing, could look at the fact that the ball has landed on a black number 15 times in a row, and they could just assume that the ball was more likely to land on the black number because they're focusing very much on results, right? And if they look at the past results and they see the ball always landing on the black number, perhaps they start to favour the black number, when the true probability of the ball landing on either a black number or a red number is close to 50-50. But someone that isn't looking at the big picture may ignore that, may not realise that, and prefer to just back, the spin of the wheel, the ball landing on black numbers, because, hey, the results show that the ball is landing on black quite often. I feel with guys like Dominic Reyes, you can get that kind of phenomenon where people look at his record and they go, he's lost his last 4, he's been knocked out in his last 3. But does his performances in those last 3 fights where he's been knocked out give us reason to doubt his ability to beat a guy like Dustin Jacoby, outside of the potential that he may not be as durable as he used to be? Perhaps he's a bit chinny now. Something to think about, right? How big of a factor do you think luck plays in sports? I think personally it plays a massive factor in sports. Huge. Absolutely huge. Which is one of the reasons why it's very difficult to make money betting on sports, because of how much of an impact luck has on the outcome of things. And this is why it's important to consistently put your money in really strong positions and overwhelmingly stack the odds in your favour to try and reduce the impact that bad luck can have on your profitability, because it will have an impact, there's no doubt about it, and it doesn't always swing both ways, and it can go long periods of time where it doesn't swing in your way. So in the context of this matchup, I do think it's important to talk about variance and divergences and luck, because Reyes might not be as bad as people think he is, and this could be one of those y'all must have forgot fights where Reyes reminds us all that 3 knockouts against 3 very dangerous opponents doesn't change the fact that 4 years ago he beat one of the greatest fighters of all time on most people's scorecards. Unfortunately for Reyes, the 3 dickheads sat cage side whose job it is to actually score fights correctly didn't do their job that night. But Reyes should have got the belt. He should have got his hands raised. Anyone with eyeballs scored that fight for Reyes. So it's an interesting fight. Very interesting. How do they both match up stylistically? Well, in many ways, Dominic Reyes is a little bit like Imavov. He's got the same body type and same sort of style. Fights with his hands down low, chin up high, which is one of his problems, why he's been caught in his last 3. And he likes to just use his length to chip away at you from a safe distance. And just like Imavov, Reyes is one of these guys that if you're striking with him in the middle of the octagon in kickboxing range, he's very good. Very good at chipping away at you. He's very technical. He's got devastating kicks, a good jab. He's very, very dangerous in that range. Similar to Imavov, and partly because Reyes fights with his hands low, he's one of these guys that doesn't react well to pressure. If you come forward, get in his face, force him to fight on the outside and pressure him, he does struggle in the same way that Imavov. And you know, one of the main reasons why Span and Prohaska were able to knock him out is because both Prohaska and Span started to really put it on Reyes, and in order to alleviate the pressure that both guys are putting on him, he kind of came forward, let his hands go to try and back him up, and because that's outside of his comfort zone, because that's not his style, he got caught. Now the question is, what does that mean in the context of this fight against Jacoby? Because for the most part, outside of the odd round here and there, like round 1 against Mirzakhanov, for the most part, Dustin Jacoby is a high pressure fighter. So technically, Jacoby does have a style that would potentially cause Dominic Reyes a lot of problems, because Jacoby does like to come forward, take control of the centre of the octagon, put a lot of pressure on his opponents, force them to fight in an uncomfortable range, which is typically not a range that Reyes performs very well in. Having said that, the real difference between a guy like Jacoby and then, you know, guys like Prohaska or Blachowicz or Span is that Jacoby's more of a volume striker. He doesn't really have much power in his hands. If you look at his record, it is very rare this guy wins a fight by knockout. If he's got the odd knockout here and there, one there against Stewart, one against Darton Jung, one against Kennedy and Chukwu, and then a few dotted around for sure, but for the most part, I would describe Jacoby as a volume striker. That's how I would describe him. To the extent that, you know, Darren Stewart, very undersized, more of a middleweight. Darton Jung knockout's impressive, but Kennedy and Chukwu's also quite chinny. So I wouldn't call Jacoby a particularly dangerous striker. So unless Dominic Reyes' chin is totally shot, I don't think Jacoby poses that much of a threat to him in terms of the knockout. So then you have to look at how these two, you know, match up technically. And Reyes is a pretty good striker. You know, he might have lost all his confidence, might not be anywhere near as aggressive or technical as he used to be. I think Cody Garbrandt is probably the best example of a fighter around Reyes' age who lost all his confidence way earlier in his career than you would have expected him to. And perhaps Reyes is, you know, more like a Cody Garbrandt. You know, his career may be coming to an end way sooner than you would have expected. But I do hold out hope for Reyes. And, you know, this is a pretty good stylistic matchup for him to see if he can get his career back on track, because he's not really going to have to worry about being taken down by Jacoby. We know Reyes is a kickboxer, so probably going to be a stand-up fight. And it's not like he's facing a big, scary, aggressive knockout artist like a Ryan Spann. Jacoby's a volume striker. He's aggressive. He fights at a high pace. But, as a kickboxer, there's nothing Reyes is going to be dealing with that he hasn't dealt with or seen before. And it also helps that Reyes is a dangerous striker. And we have seen Jacoby wobbled a couple times against Menefield, wobbled against Mirzakhanov. In terms of grappling, I wouldn't expect this fight to go to the ground. Both guys very difficult to take down and hold down. Neither of them particularly good offensive wrestlers. So this is probably going to be a stand-up fight. And it's an interesting one. I don't know what to expect. I suspect Reyes is actually a lot better than the odds are suggesting he is. But we don't know. He has suffered 3 consecutive knockouts, 3 bad ones as well. Took a lot of damage against Blachowicz when he had his nose crushed. These type of fights can change a fighter forever, but it's been a long time since we saw Reyes, about a year and a half. Maybe he's healed up in that time. We'll see. This is one of those fights where, again, going back to what I said in the Cannonier Imavov breakdown, I want to be looking for bets where I'm overwhelmingly stacking the odds in my favour. And while I do feel there's a divergence in the odds here, where they don't make a whole lot of sense to me, because I'm not sure what version of Reyes I'm getting on Saturday night, I know I'm going to be putting my money in a decent amount of danger if I bet him for, an implied probability of about 34%. I haven't ruled out the possibility of betting Reyes. I guess my problem is we haven't really seen enough of Reyes in recent fights to know how he matches up with Jacoby, simply because the styles he's faced in Spann, Prochazka and Blachowicz are kind of totally different to Jacoby. So it's tricky to kind of get a read on how this one will play out. But if we're just going off the odds, I do think you'd have to be insane to bet Dustin Jacoby this weekend. Like, to bet Jacoby at an implied probability of that, 70% range, you'd have to be crazy. Like, this is a terrible bet. If you really want to bet this fight, it's dog or pass. You've got to take Dominic Reyes. Just based on the fact that, these 4 losses could easily just be, or these 3 losses, they could just easily be bad luck. He could have just got caught, and he could show up looking like he did when he fought John Jones this weekend against Dustin fucking Jacoby. Like, Reyes beat the fucking goat. So yeah, an interesting sport. Luck plays a big factor in sports. Many people watching this will disagree, but I've been doing this a long time. That's just what I find. So yeah, definitely dog or pass. Reyes or nothing. I am tempted to bet Reyes. I'm not sure what I'm going to do yet. Might wait and see how they look at the weigh-ins and stuff. I'll let you know in the Discord if I do end up betting Reyes. At the moment it's a no, but that could turn into a yes. We'll see how it goes. So, in terms of the over-under on this one, the over 1.5 rounds is quite tempting to me, just because, like I say, I don't think Jacoby's particularly dangerous. He does have the odd knockout here and there for sure, but he's been to a decision in 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 of his last 10 fights. He does have the odd knockout here and there, but for me, more of a volume striker. When you look at Reyes, prior to this recent run of knockout losses he's been on, he was also frequently going to a decision against UFC level guys. And like I say, because Jacoby's not that dangerous, I think there's a pretty good chance that the over 1.5 rounds would hit. Again, I'm not sure if I'm going to be betting it yet. I've got some thinking to do with this fight. The main thing making me apprehensive to pull the trigger on the over and on Reyes is that at the end of the day, he has been brutally knocked out in his last 3. And while I do think he probably suffered a bit of bad luck in those 3 fights, and those 3 guys would likely beat Jacoby as well, and Blachowicz and Prochazka would likely knock Jacoby out as well. You've got to wonder how much those knockouts did to Reyes psychologically and his ability to take a shot in the future, right? 3 vicious knockouts in 3 consecutive fights. I mean, the Spann one was real bad. nose was crushed against Blachowicz. You know, just using the example of Rory McDonald, right? He was never the same after that Robbie Lawler fight, and he was pretty young when that fight happened. I think he was like early 30s, so I want to stack the odds in my favour when I bet on sports. I'm not sure if I'm doing that with Dominic Reyes, but he's very interesting to me. So in terms of the prop bets, in terms of the props, I don't know which way I would go with this. I think Reyes by decision isn't bad at 6.0 plus 550. Reyes by knockout at TKO 5.5 plus 450. That's interesting to me just because we've seen Jacoby wobbled in a few of his recent fights. And Reyes, before this bad run that he's been on, he was pretty fucking dangerous, to be fair. But I don't know which way I lean on those. So might have to make your mind up on that one yourself. There's just a couple things for you to think about. So I hope you found that useful. Now let's break down. In fact, we're not going to break this fight down. Do you know why we're not going to break this fight down? Because I already broke it down. We broke it down when they were originally scheduled to fight on this Moreno versus Royval card. Right, yeah, I just found the video and I broke down Tercios versus Rosas Jr. on this UFC Fight Night Noche predictions. Obviously, I talk a little bit about altitude in this video, which won't be a factor on the rescheduled fight this weekend. But if you watch that, you'll kind of get what's up. So I will link to the Tercios versus Rosas breakdown in the description below. And that'll make this video a bit shorter. Okay. Now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Dustin Stoltzfus versus Bruno Ferreira. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Ferreira is the favourite at average odds of around 1.38, which is going to be minus 263 for an implied probability of 72%. If we take a look at the odds on Stoltzfus, he's around an average of 3.15, which is going to be plus 215 for an implied probability of 32%. So Stoltzfus is 32 years old, 6 foot tall with a 75-inch reach. Ferreira, 31 years old, 5'10" with a 72-inch reach. So we can see that Stoltzfus is a little bit longer and taller than Ferreira. They're both about the same age. Even though Stoltzfus is a little bit longer and taller than Ferreira, obviously both guys have got very different body types, where Ferreira's got that small, muscular, compact frame, that tankiness, that true legit knockout power in everything that he throws. So this is one of those fights where we don't really know enough about Ferreira to predict how it's likely to go. If you look at Ferreira's record, he's had 12 pro fights, and pretty much all of them have ended very, very quickly. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 of his 12 career fights have ended in round 1. And the 2 fights that didn't end in round 1 ended very quickly into round 2. This one a minute into round 2. And this one 12 seconds into round 2. So, yeah, man. We don't really know anything about Ferreira apart from the fact that he's small, muscular, powerful, compact, has big power, true legit one-shot knockout power. But we don't really know a lot about this guy's grappling. We don't know anything about how he's going to look past round 1. So, can't really bet this fight, in my opinion. It's just total gambling if you do, because Ferreira is pretty much a complete unknown. We know what his strengths are. We don't know a lot about his weaknesses. So, this is a bit of a dead fight. Not much to talk about. You know, Stoltzfus is slow and stiff and bad defensively on the feet. So, he will be a sitting duck to the knockout. You know, and Ferreira is a very dangerous knockout artist. But Stoltzfus is a big guy. Not the best MMA grappler. But we don't know anything about Ferreira's takedown offense and ground games. So, if Stoltzfus can avoid getting knocked out early and can get his grappling game going, could cause Ferreira big problems. But we don't. I mean, we just don't know anything about Ferreira. There just isn't enough recent footage available on him. All of his fights have ended too quickly. So this is one of those matchups where you'd have to be crazy to bet Ferreira as a big favourite. I mean, I don't know what you'd be betting on. It'd have to be nuts, in my opinion. So if you really, really, really want to bet this fight, you've got to take Stoltzfus. I think the big underdog gives you the better risk to reward ratio. Obviously, the problem is, just as easily as, you know, Stoltzfus could use a grappling heavy game plan to potentially cause Ferreira big problems. You know, Ferreira's got decent cardio, decent takedown offense, decent ground game, all those things of which are possible. Then he is the worst stylistic matchup for Stoltzfus imaginable, because we know, based on what we've seen in Ferreira's fights, he'll have a big advantage when it comes to striking, and Stoltzfus is sitting duck to the knockout. So if Stoltzfus can't get the fight to the ground, he's going to be in a lot of trouble. But obviously, you know, without having any footage on Ferreira's takedown offense and ground game, we don't really know what the probability of Stoltzfus getting the fight to the ground is. So it's an easy pass. It's doggo pass. But no matter who you put your money on in this one, because there's so many unknowns, I think you are putting your money in a lot of danger and gambling a bit. So if we take a look at the over-under on this one, same logic applies. Very difficult for us to have a strong opinion on the over-under or prop bets when there are so many unanswered questions. So for me, this fight is a very, very easy pass. Now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Julian Marquez versus Zachary Reese. So there's quite a big odds spread on this fight. So we can see Marquez is going to be the favourite at, I guess, average odds of around 1.71. Something like that, which is minus 141 for an implied probability of 58%. If we take a look at the odds on his opponent, Mr. Zachary Reese, he's around an average of 2.15, which is going to be plus 115 for an implied probability of 47%. So Marquez is 34 years old, 6'2", with a 72-inch reach, and Reese is 30 years old, 6'4", with a 77-inch reach. So we can see that Reese has a very big, very substantial 5-inch reach advantage over Marquez, which is pretty nice. Does give him around about a 65% chance of winning this, just purely based on that reach advantage. So just like the fight between, we just spoke about actually, between Bruno Ferreira and Dustin Stoltzfus, it's impossible to predict how this one will go or form a strong opinion on how this one will go, because there's barely any footage available on Zach Reese. So he's only had 7 pro fights, and if we look at his record, every single one of them have ended in round 1, and most of them have ended pretty quickly in round 1 as well. So we've got no idea how this guy is going to look if, you know, the fight goes past round 1. You know, we don't really know anything about this guy. We haven't seen much of his striking. So a lot of his past fights, you know, involve grappling. Don't really know much about his takedown offense. You know, he's active off his back, but that's literally all we know. So I don't really have an opinion on this fight at all. In fact, I have less of an opinion on this fight than I did on the Ferreira-Stoltzfus fight, because at least there's a bit more footage on Ferreira and we know what kind of style he has and what attributes usually come with guys with his body type. Reese, for me, is a complete unknown, because in most of his fights up until this point in his career, the fight has gone to the ground very quick. He's ended up on his back in various different ways, and he's just hunted for like long shot submissions off his back, and he's got some of them, he hasn't got others. He scored a few quick knockouts. I mean, this guy is just a complete unknown. We can talk to you about Marquez's strengths and weaknesses, but I don't know how he matches up with Reese, because there just isn't enough footage to know what type of fighter Reese is. I don't even know how guys like Zach Reese get into the UFC. Like, no disrespect to this guy, I don't want to hate on him or anything like that, but what the fuck have the matchmakers seen to give this guy a contract? What have they seen? What have they seen? Look at the records of the guys he's been facing. 1-0, 0-1, 0-0, 6-3, 5-10, 6-0, and congratulations, you're in the UFC. I don't get it, man. I just don't understand how guys like this are in the UFC. They're total unknowns. So I've no idea how they match up stylistically. What I do know about Julian Marquez is he hits hard, he's aggressive, he's a dangerous striker. He has terrible takedown defense, terrible ground game, not the best cardio. No idea how he matches up with Reese based on those things. We'll hopefully get to learn a lot more about Reese this weekend, because if this fight also ends in round 1, next time Reese fights in the UFC, again, we won't have any idea what to expect from him, because there's going to be no fucking footage on him. So yeah, this one's an easy fucking pass, and the same thing goes for the over-under and the prop bets on this one. Without knowing more about Reese, can't have an opinion on this fight. So if you bet this fight, you're just totally gambling, in my opinion. I don't know why you would be betting based on. There's nothing we know about this guy. So now let's break down the next fight on this card, which is going to be Punahele Soriano versus Miguel Baeza. So if we start off by taking a look at the odds on this one, we can see that Baeza is a pretty big favourite at average odds of around 1.50, which is going to be minus 200 for an implied probability of 67%. If we take a look at the odds on Soriano, he is around an average of 2.65, which is going to be plus 165 for an implied probability of 38%. So Baeza is 31 years old, 6'2", with a 74.5-inch reach, and Soriano, 31 years old, 5'11", with a 72-inch reach. So both guys roughly the same size. Baeza a little bit longer and taller. That's probably negated by Soriano's, muscular power. Not too much of a size and reach advantage there for Baeza. He's long and lean and skinny. Soriano obviously smaller, muscular, compact, bit of a tank, hits very hard. True legit knockout power in his hands. So how do these two match up from a stylistic point of view? Earlier we were talking about how Dominic Reyes has potentially suffered a little bit of bad luck and has obviously, fallen on hard times, 4-fight losing streak. We got two more guys here who are also on pretty tough losing streaks. This is potentially one of those WWE type, retirement fights, loser go home type fights, where Baeza has lost his last 3. Soriano has lost 4 of his last 5. And his luck against Lungambula was a little bit lucky when Lungambula broke his rib in round 1. But yeah, both these guys had a lot of hype behind them. They were on big winning streaks. And then all of a sudden they fall on hard times. And the loser of this fight, probably will lose their place in the UFC. So a lot of pressure on both of them. How they match up from a stylistic point of view. I will say this. With a guy like Dominic Reyes on a losing streak, I do think a lot of bad luck has contributed to that losing streak. With Soriano and Baeza, they definitely have weaknesses, which are at the root cause of why both guys have been losing so many of their recent fights. And it'll be interesting to see which guy comes out on top this weekend. So, in terms of how these two match up from a stylistic point of view, the key to beating Soriano is pretty simple. Early in the fight, he's extremely dangerous. He's got big power. He's very aggressive. True legit knockout power in every single thing that he throws. But he loses that power pretty quickly. And if you can make it through the first sort of 5 or 6 minutes of a fight, after that, Soriano loses his knockout power and just isn't particularly dangerous from there. From there, he's kind of slow, he's sloppy. He's not particularly dangerous anyway. He's not really going to try and take you down. If he does, he's not going to be that effective. So the key to beating Soriano is just making it through that first round. It's not an easy thing to do. Soriano is a very dangerous striker, very aggressive, very powerful. But Baeza's a pretty technical striker. He moves well. He's a good counter striker. He's got good footwork, good movement. We have seen him get dinged a lot in fights. He does get rocked, does get wobbled a lot. Obviously, that's a problem because Soriano is a very dangerous striker. However, Baeza's got really good cardio, fights at a high pace. He's very technical. If Baeza can just make it out of round 1, which I think he's technical enough to do, he will probably then go on to kind of outclass and outstrike Soriano in the 2nd and 3rd round, when Soriano is too tired to match Baeza's volume and too tired to really hurt him on the feet. I don't see grappling being a thing in this fight because, you know, even though Soriano actually has a base in wrestling, it's very rare that Soriano grapples because he hasn't got the cardio to grapple, so he doesn't even try. That's why most of Soriano's fights are stand-up fights. So yeah, this is one of those matchups where Baeza should get the job done here. Very unlikely Soriano is going to be able to keep up with the pace that Baeza sets or outstrike him over 3 rounds. But Soriano could knock Baeza out early. So this is one of those matchups where I think the odds are roughly where they should be. Knowing that Baeza does get dinged a lot in fights and knowing how dangerous Soriano is early in fights, I don't think you're getting an amazing deal on Baeza. You know, at an implied probability of around 67%. So this is one of those fights where I do think Baeza's more likely to win. If you held a gun to my head and forced me to bet one of these guys, I would prefer to bet Baeza. Think he's more than likely to win. But his odds just don't get me excited. I just don't want to be betting on a guy like Baeza against someone as dangerous as Soriano as a big favourite. We can find way better positions for us to put our money. And don't forget, boys, we're going for 10-0 on the pre-fight money line bets, boys. We're going for 10-0. We're 8-0 at the moment. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. We want that 10-0. And if we're betting guys like Miguel Baeza, putting our money in a lot of danger. So we want to go 10-0 on pre-fight bets. So we need to be patient, be disciplined, stick to the principles that have enabled us to make a profit on everything that we do for so long. Simple as that. So that's going to be it. That is going to be it for this breakdown. Let's talk about the over-under and the prop bets. So, we take a look at the over-under on this one. The over 1.5 rounds is set in the even money odds range. Very tempted by that, and I will probably bet it. I do think a decent amount of wiki capping has gone into the odds on that, because if you look at Baeza's record, very rare that his fights go to a decision or go past 1.5 rounds. There's loads of wins inside the distance here. If you look at Soriano, he's got a lot of quick finishes as well. But what you notice about Soriano is styles make fights. And stylistically, I think the way these two match up makes it reasonably likely we go over 1.5 rounds. Because Baeza's not a crazy dangerous striker, and Soriano's tough, he's durable, he's got a good chin. He's a tough fucker. Even when he gets tired, he's a tough fucker. And I think Baeza's going to respect Soriano's power early, be very defensive, circle away from him, not want to engage too much for fear of being caught and knocked out. And with the added pressure of both these guys probably realising if they lose, they're going to lose their job in the UFC. They're probably going to fight a bit smarter, a bit safer, a bit more tactically than usual. You could see Soriano start slower in an effort to try and pace himself and manage his cardio better than he has in the past. So I do think there's a good chance this over 1.5 rounds hits. But what I'm going to do, just to be sure this is a good bet, because I'm not totally sure right now, I will research this fight for a second time, and then I'll make my mind up on it, and I will let you know in the Discord if I decide to pull the trigger. Just because I don't want to jump into a bet right now. I'd rather research the fight for a second time so we can be absolutely sure that we're putting our money in a strong position with this over. But my lean would certainly be the over 1.5 rounds on this, just I think it gives you the better risk to reward ratio than the under. So in terms of the prop bets, Baeza by decision is interesting to me. I don't love the odds, but it's interesting to me just because I think both guys might fight a little bit safer and smarter than usual. Because they'll have that fear of losing and then obviously losing their job in the UFC. So I hope you found that breakdown useful. If you did, please hit the like button below. Subscribe if you haven't already. And hopefully you'll find the information in this video useful enough to make some extra cash this weekend. Take care, everybody. I'll see you guys in the Discord. Love you all. I'll be back next week with another breakdown video. Nice one, guys. Take care. Bye.